ACM-W meeting this evening. Today we have Miranda and Allison here to talk about cloud computing. But before we get into that meat and content of this meeting, I wanted to talk about the raffle that we have happening towards the end of the semester. So we have this really cool thing. It's a 3D printer, the Ender 3. And if you guys don't know, the more meetings that you come to and sign in, the more entries you get to go into this raffle. And at the end of the semester, we'll do a drawing, and whoever gets that will win this 3D printer. So please sign in using the link in the description below. It'll take you to Rowdy link, and then it will add you to the list. Okay, this is the student feedback survey. Recently, ACM has chatted with the CS department chair, which is Dr. Prasad, the chair assistant, Dr. Zhang, and the undergraduate advisor, Dr. Korkmaz. And essentially, the meeting basically went over how we can make the CS or student experience better in the CS department. So if you guys have taken any of these courses listed on the screen in the previous 2 semesters and the current one, so spring 2020, summer 2020, and the current fall 2020, please go ahead and fill out this feedback survey and give us some quality feedback. It will help us a lot in terms of making up points and presenting it to the CS department to make our degree course much better. Okay, upcoming events. ACM is having Paycom come tomorrow, and they're going to go over automation. ICPC and Rowdy Creators are happening every week, so nothing's have changed from that. Following ICPC and Rowdy Creators on the weekend, on Monday, the Intro to Tech series has a meeting over GitHub. So if you don't know how to use GitHub or you're not sure how to get into it, please stop by at this meeting. We have some really quality content for you guys.
Hi guys. So we wanted to provide y'all with a couple of scholarship opportunities. So these are 3 actually are due September 30th, which is pretty soon. So if you are interested, we have the QR codes popping up in a little bit. If y'all want to take a picture of that for like application and more information. And lastly, there is a volunteer opportunity with Youth Code Jam. So you can be a coach for a project session or even be a judge after the event itself and judge one of the projects. All the spots to teach a workshop are actually taken, but you can still sign up for the other 2. And if you forward a copy of your registration confirmation email to council@acmutsa.org, you'll gain more entries in a drawing to win the 3D printer that Tiffany was talking about at the end of the semester, or even get extra credit points for one of your CS classes. So yeah.
Okay, and then that's all the updates from us. The last one would be our next meeting. Just wanted to talk about it real quick. It's happening on October 6th, so the next week, but the next Tuesday, so bi-weekly. It's going to be at 5:15 p.m. on YouTube, and we have JP Morgan coming to talk about the day in the life as a software engineer. So all you software tech people out there, if you're interested in how JP Morgan software engineers go about their life, go ahead and mark this down on your calendar and be sure to check it out. And if you guys haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel that you're viewing this live stream on. It would help a lot to get a gauge of where everyone's at. And okay, we're getting into the main content of today's meeting. So if you've just joined the meeting right now, no worries. You can watch the first part later. But we have Miranda and Allison here to talk about cloud computing. And I'm going to give them like a minute or 2 to just get situated and get ready to present. But quickly, I wanted to talk about questions. If you guys have questions or any questions during the live stream, please use the Slido link that will be posted in the live chat and ask questions from there. And then at the end of the meeting, we will give those questions to Allison and Miranda to answer. So, okay. just wanted to start and ask Miranda, Allison, are you guys ready to start presenting?
All right.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and stop my screen share. And whenever you guys are ready.
Can you see it?
Yes.
All right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Levine. I am a UTSA graduate, class of 2002, which makes me feel really old when you start to say stuff like that. You guys were talking about some of the trials and tribulations, and I was kind of laughing to myself earlier because back when I was there was no student union building, and we only had 2 parking lots. There was no parking garages whatsoever, and it was basically the 4 main buildings, and then the business school had 1 building on the side. So things have changed a lot since then, and it makes me super proud to be a Roadrunner. We didn't have football back then. Most people didn't really live on campus or near campus. It was much more of a commuter type school. So it's just so exciting to me to see so many new folks there, and the school just continue to grow, and the sports continue to kind of gain momentum, and more people to be, UTSA alum and growing. And we have such a strong group of people. Miranda Miller is also with me from Accenture. She's part of our recruiting department. So you can kind of interchange with both of us today on the call. I'll primarily talk about cloud computing, but I'll also go into a little bit about Accenture and maybe kind of what a career with Accenture might look like to give you some ideas. And then Miranda's also on to answer any questions you might have about our recruiting process, or just maybe in general about some things. So without that, I'll go ahead and get going. So cloud computing, cloud computing has kind of been I don't want to say a buzzword. It was a buzzword maybe 3 to 4 years ago. And now it's just kind of becoming something, that's just part of kind of computing and coding and everything in general these days. What is cloud? And I kind of laugh, a cloud is just somebody else's server. It's really the truth, right? There's a picture, my, IT friends, we all kind of have little memes that we share. And it's just it's really no different other than it's a shared pool of configurable computing resources. So it's somebody else's server somewhere else that, we're really going to take advantage of and use. And so for you guys today, my goal is to just kind of talk about what that means, why companies might choose to use cloud, what are some of the considerations or kind of fallbacks, if you will, and then maybe what to think about if you're coding in cloud or if you're working with cloud resources, and how to handle that. So let me go into the next slide. And I don't have a ton of slides. You're not going to get bored by slides, I promise. So cloud. So in my day-to-day career right now, I actually, for Accenture, I lead a team of developers as well as user experience designers and business analysts. And we create cloud-based applications using Salesforce. I've worked for Accenture for about 9 years, going on 10 now. And I've spent the majority of that time actually supporting SAP, which is a very large ERP system. And then the past 2 years now supporting Salesforce work. And that is very much kind of on trend with in general what's going on with Accenture, which is also how I feel things across the industry are going as well. And what I mean by that is a lot of our work was primarily what we called ERP, these large monolithic, huge systems, the type of stuff that I learned about when I was at UTSA and working throughout my college career. And then now there's this pivot to more of the cloud computing, more of the Salesforce, ServiceNow, Azure, Microsoft is Azure, there's Amazon AWS, you've probably heard of all of them. And there's a lot of different types. So what are some of the characteristics of cloud computing? So in order for something to be kind of identified as cloud computing, these are the 5 basic characteristics. It's an on-demand self-service. So meaning that you can request whatever it is, and you can usually provision, if it's a new server, you can literally in Amazon, AWS, you just hit a button and you get a new server all ready to go. which is really great. There's no manual configuration or setup really needed. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can go tweak some settings if you want, but it's really nice to be able to quickly like spin up a server, do some things, and then you can just trash it later, without having to really worry too much about it. Again, we talked about on the last slide, but it's shared resource pooling. So the idea is that there is a shared set of resources somewhere and that you're working together in what they call multi-tenancy. So you might hear that word a lot when you hear about cloud. Multi-tenancy just basically means that, like, think of it as a large apartment building. And if each person's a tenant in their apartment, multi-tenancy means that there's a bunch of us all sharing the same large building or the same large group of resources. And then rapid elasticity. So the idea here is that an organization or whomever's using the cloud can easily change what they're using. So for example, if you're Amazon and Amazon Prime Day comes, or the Black Friday or Cyber Monday comes, they can easily scale up their services so they can add a bunch of resources to the pool in order to sufficiently meet the needs or the demands of what's going on. Just like they can also scale back. So if something happens where they know they're going to have a lull in service, then they can also use that to have less availability. And that usually means that because it's a measured service, that you're paying more or less depending upon your use of it. So it's more of a pay-as-you-go type perspective. So that's also why a lot of folks really like cloud computing, is that you're not paying for anything unnecessary. You're not paying like for licenses that might just sit there and not be used, or you're not paying for a server that's just over in the back room that you're waiting to have the chance to use, whenever it is the busy time for you, if you will. And then the last one here is just internet access. So in order to be cloud computing, you do need to have access to the internet, or I should really kind of asterisk this to say that you just need to have network access. I asterisk it just because a lot of the work that I do with Accenture is for the government. So I work for Accenture Federal Services. So we do a lot of work with the Department of Defense, as well as a lot of the different civilian services. For example, I mentioned I work with the USDA. So in those instances, a Department of Defense, for example, that is not going to be using a public cloud. You're not going to find any Department of Defense like Army applications out there just on the public cloud. Those are in their own privately housed, kind of siloed off to the side clouds, but they are still in a cloud provider, if you will. So the government does use cloud, but they think through the security around that before they engage with it. So then over on the right, we have some of the benefits of cloud computing. And I feel like by talking through the characteristics, we kind of touched on these already. But the first one is speed and agility. And so again, the ability to simply click a button and get a server, within seconds is a great example of the speed. And then also same with the agility, we kind of talked about, you can have sort of these peaks or valleys in the demand you need. And so for this cloud computing to be able to quickly scale and to kind of flow with you and whatever you need, that's one of the key benefits behind it. The next one is innovation. And I think this is really important to the industry right now and kind of what's going on. Cloud computing, because it's fairly cheap in that, again, it's a measured service and you just kind of pay as you go. And it's so quick, it's enabled a lot of companies that may not have been very innovative in the past to definitely kind of enter this digital era. So a lot of the cloud service providers provide different items around AI, like there's different algorithms and different ways you can plug in, you can set up chatbots, all sorts of different things that are out there. And so I've seen a lot of companies and a lot of organizations that are really interested in just kind of testing the water, and they're able to use cloud to kind of dip their toe in and try some innovation and really see if it makes sense. So, back before, they used to have to invest tons of money to like kind of be on the cutting edge and kind of be the front runner for innovation. And now that's really pivoted a lot to mean that everybody's kind of in that innovative area now. The next one is scale. So I talked about that again before. So, the benefit of cloud is the ability to scale across, these large resource pools and to be able to kind of work with others that are also in the cloud. So plug and play is kind of like, I know an old term, but I kind of use that a lot. But, you know, like we think about YouTube, like I think we're streaming this right now. So you have two cloud services, you have Zoom and you have YouTube, and they're sort of plugging together to be able to both benefit from this. And I think a lot of companies see that as well as they continue to use cloud computing and different cloud services. Another example here is cost savings. So again, I mentioned cost savings because it is typically pay as you go. And also, you're no longer having to run like a very traditional IT shop. So early on in my career, one of my first jobs was to spend a lot of time in the data center. The data center was like this cold, dark room where all the servers lived. They were stacked up. The room was always kept at like 60 degrees. So you always had a jacket at your desk that you'd pick up whenever you had to go in the server room and do work. So now we don't have the need for these large data centers and these server closets to be around and for everybody to be constantly sort of maintaining them. For example, the company I worked for, we used to lease all of our servers. So we had this hardware cost, then we'd have to, install an operating system. We'd have an operating system cost. So now all of that has sort of gone out because we can either use like an Amazon Web Service or an Azure to build a server, or we can even use software as a service like Salesforce or ServiceNow without even needing to worry about the hardware or the OS level items. So with that, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So managing limitations. So there are a few drawbacks about working in the cloud, so I want to be kind of honest about that and talk about those. So how do we deal with the cloud? So one thing is state. We need to think about how we constantly need to determine the state that we're in or what's going on, and that might take a little bit of effort to kind of make all of the components blend together. An example I can think of is, oftentimes you're working with not just a tool. So for me, I work a lot in Salesforce. And so we might use Salesforce, but then we might also use a third-party provider for, something that maybe Salesforce just doesn't have functionality for. So in my world, that is SpringCM, which is owned by a company called DocuSign, which is a fairly large company. But SpringCM is a document repository. So Salesforce has kind of said, Salesforce does more of like CRM type applications. That's customer relationship management. So Salesforce has said, we don't mind storing some of the documents, but like our main goal here is not to be a document repository. There are other people that can do that better than us. And therefore they sort of relinquish that. So I mention this because in our applications, a lot of what I do is we'll take in information from a customer, and then that information ultimately gets pulled together and then compiled and put into a PDF document. That PDF document is sort of the legal document generated by the USDA for their customers. But an example of this is that SpringCM is outside of Salesforce. So therefore, there's this need for both of them to be talking to understand what state each one is in. So for example, when we hand off from Salesforce into SpringCM, we need to make sure that we're pooling and kind of knowing that SpringCM has completed processing something so that we can then enable that button or enable that next step or process within our Salesforce application. So that's an example of state tracking. The other thing to think about is latency. So there's a ton of APIs that are always being used. So again, you're constantly working with other providers that are usually outside of your particular group or your application. And so APIs are a little bit slower, when you're trying to transfer that information and kind of go back and forth. So it's just important to know that as well. And then the last one here is around what they call cold start. And so this really has to do when we're thinking about creating custom applications like Java applications or building up new servers from scratch, talking through like AWS or Azure. So if you need to start a whole new container, which would be, like a whole new area in your cloud in which you're going to start storing things, it'll take a little bit more time to kind of start this new container. And kind of get everything set up and ready to go if something doesn't already exist that's similar. So those are some of the things to think through. And then here, I just wanted to cover some of the items that I kind of thought of when we're working on coding for cloud. So again, the first one around events triggered is kind of what I talked about in the last one, a little bit about latency, but it's just kind of thinking through that every time an event is triggered, that's usually what's triggering something to happen within your application. So cloud is very much driven by these events. Some examples here, are around a photo taken or an order placed. So every little thing is triggering something else to happen in the background. It's also kind of important to think about triggering something when an event doesn't happen, if that makes sense. So, oftentimes we abandon a shopping cart, for example. So we should think through that an abandoned shopping cart might also be a sign, a trigger for something as well. Like maybe we want to send that over to a sales rep so that they can reach out to that person to find out, maybe why they abandoned their cart. Maybe the prices were too high, or maybe we can work with them and still manage to kind of save the sale from it. So think about both events and non-events, if you will. The next one is data storage. So there are a ton of details to be captured and stored. And to me, this is kind of one of the areas of cloud that I think people are still sort of figuring out, very much similar to how we spent a lot of time with the ERPs before. But the ERPs, the data storage is, it's around, we're getting all of this data and we're storing it, but it costs money in the cloud. I mean, I just mentioned that the cloud is cheap, but at the same time, we can't store, 10 years worth of emails in the cloud. We need to eventually migrate things out and have an archive plan. So we should plan for efficient storage of data, but also have an archival plan or sort of an offloading plan where we might move that data after a certain period of time to another place that might be a lower cost storage. And then the next one is functions. So making sure that when we have event details, that we are processing information together. So we're building a lot of functions that kind of work interchangeably across the different applications. So just kind of making sure that we're processing everything, that we're kind of working and thinking about interoperability and sort of kind of sharing, if you will, across an entire application or across the different functions and features there. And then I also had mentioned before about APIs. So APIs, again, are really key. I see a lot of coding around APIs. So if you are not already familiar with them, it's definitely something to kind of familiarize yourself with. APIs are the kind of main gateway to share information. So a lot of the things that are listed here are also some of the same events that we talked about before that are triggered, but notifications that can be created, any photos that are shared, you might have analytics generated, lots of different, ways to think about kind of APIs, if you will. All right, so going to my next slide. So what are some of the trends in cloud? So, I kind of touched on some of them now, but there is just so much already out there and so much more to come. I feel like cloud is something that is going to be around forever. So definitely pick up a little bit about cloud, understand what it means. There's different types. So infrastructure as a service is IaaS. And that's where you have your big players like Amazon and Microsoft. Google has also recently, they've always had a cloud, but from an enterprise perspective, Google Cloud just didn't get picked up very, very quickly. It's kind of interesting. They just didn't position themselves in the market very well. And so they're trying to pick up a lot of ground these days, but they're just not as pervasive in the market as Amazon and Microsoft are. And then I also talked about software as a service or SaaS providers. So those are ones you probably have heard of. Salesforce is very common. ServiceNow is another highly common one, and Workday as well. And then there's a lot of newcomers. So Snowflake is a company that just had an IPO last week. And so they're a database, if you can imagine, data repository. They're a big one. But then you also have a lot of these like mega ERPs that I mentioned before. So SAP and Oracle, when you think about those from an ERP perspective, they were these huge, massive They were, nothing was necessarily in the cloud with them. They were always these just massive ERP systems on big databases like Oracle or SQL. However, you're starting to see trends where all of these large, massive applications like that are also moving to the cloud. So SAP has their own cloud, Oracle has their own cloud. So there's definitely a push for, all of these old kind of monolithic applications to now move up into the cloud. So again, that continued kind of, thought around APIs and just kind of getting everything to talk to one another. My recommendation to you all is to take advantage of free training. So, I keep talking about Salesforce just because I'm the most familiar with it, but Salesforce has what they call trailheads available out there. It's a super easy way to just kind of learn more about it. You get little certifications for each one that you take, and those can be sort of referenced, if you will. So if you apply for a job or submit your resume, you'll often list out the different certifications that you might have, and whomever's interviewing you will probably go validate on the Salesforce website that you have those certifications. So it's a great way to kind of learn a little bit more and get more out there.
Yeah, Allison, I'd also like to add, I believe UTSA should be actually offering some of those courses. I'm not sure if they're for free or you have to, sorry to cough, or you have to ask or take those courses directly through the Career Center. But UTSA has been kind of partnering up and offering some of those courses.
Nice. Thanks. So yeah, and then, kind of moving from that into woman of cloud work or woman in cloud work, if you will. So, I feel like some things to consider right now. Recruiting definitely, I think there's a continued focus right now on just inclusion and diversity across all hiring, and that's both at the entry level and the experience levels. And so I think you'll continue to see that. And I think more and more companies are being very, conscious of who they're hiring, of what their teams look like. And that's definitely a trend, I think, that's here to stay. And I think it's a breath of fresh air. Coming from, I mentioned I graduated in 2002, and I spent probably the large majority of my career thus far often being the only female. And that has changed dramatically over the past few years. Now, majority of time I have female bosses. I have teams that are, definitely more of a half and half. And so that's been really nice to see the trend change in our industry, and that more and more women are working in IT. Some other thing that I really appreciate right now. So COVID has been, definitely disruptive to all of us in our daily lives. One thing that I've actually found kind of nice about it is that I consider it kind of a leveled playing field. And what I mean by that is there used to be certain people that might have been in the office. For example, I work a lot with folks that are in the DC metro area. And so it was always hard for me to not necessarily be there in the office, maybe not to be on site with our client or working through them. And I've enjoyed the fact that now we're kind of all together on the same level. So I don't feel like there's any like micro inequities happening because so-and-so walked by so-and-so's desk and, maybe they got something. So I definitely encourage you to kind of take advantage of the state that we're in. I know Accenture, we're still hiring for our San Antonio office, but there's definitely a lot more leeway, I would say, right now about where folks are and doing the work. I think that will change as more and more people come back to the office, but I think it's also a nice thing to sort of appreciate right now. And it's also given a lot of folks, that sort of, I think, reinforcement that it's okay for employees to work from home. And Accenture, we have been working from home for a long time. That it's nothing new for us, but I definitely can see some of the some of the like the more old school type folks, if you will, or organizations that they've been able to understand. In fact, I just read an article today about Apple. Like Apple was a company that, believe it or not, they did not believe in working from home. And they've just released something today that said that they've realized like folks can work successfully from home, and that they're going to continue to allow more and more people to do that. So I think that'll be exciting to see. And then talking about entry-level roles. So there are tons of entry-level roles out there for cloud. As I mentioned, at Accenture, I have just seen that our work in general has moved from a lot of the old school sort of SAP and Oracle type work into what we call the digital area or the cloud area around Salesforce, ServiceNow. So I continue to see that, and I think that will permeate for a long time. Some other things to think about from a skill perspective are agile. So you guys probably don't talk too much about project management and sort of the general kind of ways to put things together, or maybe you do, which is great. But if not, I would definitely encourage you to understand a little bit more about agile project teams and agile project management. Not that you're going to be expected to manage a project initially, but you will be expected to participate on an agile team. Most cloud work is always agile these days, and there's also a lot of good information out there. Just understanding what daily Scrum calls are like, how we work through tickets. A lot of folks these days are expected to be sort of flex workers. So you might be a developer, but you might also be a tester in that, you're expected to not just develop, but also test your code. Like we used to have very siloed responsibilities in the dev world or in the IT world where, you were a dev and you took a while, you coded, you developed the solution, and then you handed it off to a tester or a QA person, and then they sat there and tested it, tried to find a bug. If so, they would hand it back to you. And if not, they would pass it along to the client. And now with Agile, everything is a lot smaller. So your projects are, or not even your projects, but your work, instead of developing this massive application, you're just working usually on one little feature or one user story to get you to that feature's completion. And in that, we want folks to be much more versatile. So we want you to be open to not just being a developer, but to also being really good at testing your code, or not just being a developer, but being a little bit functional, being able to understand what the business or your client is trying to do so that you can kind of put on that hat and think through. And then another trend along that line is user experience or UX. So a lot of our designs these days are very much focused on what that user interaction is like. I heard you all talking about, I think, your class experience earlier, and that sort of made me think about it. But there is a ton around just how the user is going to interact and experience your application, and how to build your application in a way that it's very simple and yet very intuitive. One of the things we talk about a lot on my project is folks don't have time to download like this massive user guide and understand how to use something. If you were to download the Lyft app on your phone, it doesn't come with a user guide. I mean, I'm sure you can dig through and find some FAQs or something, but it has to be intuitive, and you have to understand as soon as you download it and open it, what you need to click on and where you need to go next. And so it's important as a developer that you kind of think through what that means and put on that UX hat when you're building your code and building your new applications. And then some other things I just kind of wanted to add that I had seen on some of your slides, I think earlier. I saw something about, or I heard you all mention something about automation. So that's definitely another trend in general, but I think also very much in cloud right now. So we have moved to a very automated world where you might be a developer and you're going to develop code. I saw GitHub on your list. You're going to develop code usually in Bitbucket, GitHub, and all of these different areas that kind of play together where you're going to release your code so you can kind of merge your code with all the other developers. And then we use a lot of automation to run automated tests. So there's a lot of work around building automated test scripts, building out just scripts that call the different automated tests scenarios. And then there's also a lot more automation around, once something's past that, then it might go through, for example, like a code scan where it can be scanned for security vulnerabilities and things like that. And then ultimately a script, an automated script, if you will, that deploys that code up to the next level for testing, or the next level for, wherever you're headed. Usually it's from dev to QA or to some type of integrated sandbox with other developers. And then ultimately usually to a user acceptance testing. So those are definitely great things to learn more about, as well as around automation and sharing of code and code source repositories, if you have not already. All right, so with that, I've got 10 minutes till 6, so I think we're doing good. So I am going to run through just some information about Accenture as well. So thanks for listening to me talk about the cloud. Let me just take a few minutes to talk about Accenture. So one of the great things that I think Accenture affords is Accenture is what we call a technology consulting company. So when you work for Accenture, it's really exciting because you have the ability to really work for a bunch of different companies or organizations all at one time. And what I mean by that is, in my career at Accenture, I've been able to support a bunch of different clients over the years. I mentioned I worked in Department of Defense for a while. I worked at Amtrak for a little while. I worked at USDA. So it's really exciting with my career at Accenture to be able to kind of move around between projects and get exposure to all of these different areas and different ways that they work. And then I've also had the ability to, as I mentioned, work through different types of technologies. So a lot of my career early on, I spent working in the SAP space, and then I moved from the SAP space into Salesforce. So Accenture has afforded me this career where I can sort of jump around, not only between clients, but also between technologies, which I really appreciate. And I don't think, coming out of college, I did not really understand a whole lot about consulting. Like I kind of knew some of the big players, which were like Accenture and others, but I didn't really know what a career with them meant. So I just want to kind of tell you a little bit more about it here. And please ask questions as well. Miranda and I would love to answer any questions. So I talked about Accenture Federal Services. So Accenture is our larger company. Accenture is a huge, more than 482,000 people across the globe company. We work across 120 different countries, and we are definitely one of the major players in the technology space. I think it's on the next slide, so I'm not gonna steal my thunder there. Accenture Federal Services is a subsidiary of Accenture. So because we want to do work with the US federal government, the US requires that we be our own separate company, that we're not governed by Accenture, is actually incorporated out of Ireland. So therefore, Accenture Federal Services has to be a completely separate US-based company. So it's kind of great because we get the best of both worlds. We have a tie back into Accenture. So if we need help, we can reach out to those 482,000 people to get some help with whatever we might be working on. But at the same time, Accenture Federal Services allows us to focus our work across US federal government and other civilian services. So this is a quick snapshot of AFS. So we have 40 offices across the United States and 9,000 total people. We work with 15 different executive offices and over 60 agencies. And so by agencies, that's Department of Justice, Department of Agriculture, Customs and Border Patrol. There's just so many different agencies out there. We have been one of the best technologies companies to work for in America, number 36, and number 9 on the top 50 companies for diversity. And I think I mentioned this before, that I definitely feel that my teams are always very diverse and made up of a lot of different people, which I appreciate. The different areas in which we group ourselves within AFS are defense and intel. So folks that work to support the Department of Defense primarily, or intel agencies. Civilian, which is where I fall right now, working for the US Department of Agriculture. Health, so a lot of our areas focus on health. At one point we had healthcare.gov. That was one of our big takeaways back when it failed. We were not the ones that failed. We were ones that saved it after it failed and continued on. Public safety. So again, TSA is another one that we support. CBP falls into that category. And then there are some what we call quasi-governmental. I mentioned Amtrak before. So Amtrak receives government appropriated funds, therefore that makes them somewhat governmental, but they're also a private company. So they're kind of like on the verge of both there. These are some of the different clients. You likely cannot make out the writing on these, but they're showing all of the different agencies that we work with. So within defense, we're in pretty much every single defense right now, defense organization, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, you name it. We're likely there and doing some work. And the same goes really for civilian and public safety as well. Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, NASA. I mean, so much work to be done. And this is one of the best parts about working for Accenture. So, you know, what I love about going to my job every day is that my job is to support the USDA. My specific role is working with a group that is called Animal, Plant, and Health Inspection Services. Their job is to enforce the Animal Welfare Act. A Netflix TV show that just recently made the department that I work with very famous is Tiger King. So when Tiger King came out earlier this year, a lot of folks were very interested in these exotic zoos and, you know, how they're allowed to operate and, you know, are they operating safely? So a lot of the folks that I work with are the types of people that go out to those locations and inspect them and either license or regulate what's going on within them. And I would add a little asterisk there that not necessarily all of them in operation are operating with a valid license or following proper guidance. But it's fun to kind of develop our application right now for licensing groups like that or zoos like that, and to work with a client and to hear the stories about them visiting some of those same places that are seen on the TV show. They've definitely interacted with Joe Exotic and some of those personalities and have some crazy stories to tell. So what makes my career so awesome right now is the ability to build these applications that are serving the citizens of the United States. So I feel like every day I'm able to come to work and create something that enables us to be better as citizens. So it enables us to protect the animals and plants and livestock that are here in America, which is really fun. So moving from that, this is just our locations around San Antonio. Again, all of us are working from home for the most part right now with COVID, but someday we do hope to unite again in a place of work. I mentioned Agile. You know, a lot of our projects are Agile, which is all about collaboration, and it's really important from a collaborative perspective for us to be in the same location. Our work locations are also, I hate to use the word fun, but they're very relaxed, if you will. They're, you know, they're built to have a lot of what we call fluid spaces. So meaning there's a lot of like couches or like chairs or bean bags where you can kind of like throw yourself or like, you know, grab a friend. There's little like stand-up pods that might have like TVs and whiteboards and stuff, or like maybe you just want to grab somebody and you guys want to whiteboard an idea or take a look at something. So there's a lot of shareable spaces like that. We also encourage you to kind of take brain breaks. So, you know, our offices also have, you know, pool tables, foosball, you know, some of the fun stuff as well, so that you can kind of relax for a few minutes and get your mind off something. So for Accenture Federal Services, if you were to come work with us, we have two main locations. One we call Fairgrounds, which is near Fortin and Culebra. And then another we call Laureate, which is near USAA at I-10 and Huebner. And then listed here is all of the different things that we do within San Antonio for Accenture Federal Services. So this is a really large list, I realize, and it's kind of overwhelming. It's a lot of things on one slide. But if you want to understand what a career looks like, it is not limiting you necessarily to one of these areas. However, you will typically, when you join Accenture, be placed into one of these areas. And again, it doesn't mean that you're going to stay there forever. I'm a good example of somebody that was in ERP, which is that center one there. And I've now jumped over to the left into the red one. But I wanted you to get an idea of all of the different kinds of work that we do. So custom development, a lot of you are likely learning Java and JavaScript. So there is a lot of custom development that goes on. Java is definitely one of the more leading areas that we're always growing in and have a lot of work in. Testing is also one of our key areas. We hire a lot of testers, and testing is a really great way of getting an entry-level role with the company. Testing, I think a lot of folks don't feel that they're excited about it when they first, join the company. But I encourage you to really consider a testing role. Testing is a great way to be entry level, to join a project and to learn a lot about what's going on with the project. You get to see the code, you get to test what it's doing and make sure that it's meeting the user acceptance criteria. But at the same time, it's giving you that sort of like background to start to build from, so that if you're interested in maybe being a developer, now that you've understand a little bit more about how something works, it enables you to kind of go back and do that. Or if you're interested in maybe being more of a functional type person, it gives you some perspective about how the system works to be able to go and talk to the client and to understand more. There's a ton of testing. I mentioned a lot around automation earlier. There's also a lot around 508 usability, which is the just making sure that that our applications meet 508 compliance, so that they are, the different types of folks out there, all sorts of people can be able to access the same application in a similar experience or manner. Then the largest growing group we probably have right now is under the digital and emerging area. So again, I talked about Salesforce and ServiceNow. We've also seen a lot of growth around analytics lately and business intelligence. And then I also had touched on user experience earlier, user experience design. The middle section is ERPs. So again, those are the large enterprise resource planning systems. SAP and Oracle are the two primary there. That work had dipped down for a while, but I also see that starting to kind of tick back up in the coming years for us as well. We also have infrastructure work. So the folks that are more focused on hosting, system admin, cloud admin, security, those types of roles. And then we also have a cyber center. So we do hire a lot of folks around security and cyber areas. So we do management, detection and response, scanning applications. We support the ERPs and their security and cyber needs, and also work through identity management. And then finally, we also have what we call the PMO, which is our project management office. So these folks support our projects. So as I go through and run all of these great projects, I need support to help, report and help see my finances and things like that. So we also have a great group of people that support us through that as well. And so with that, I will pause here and maybe take some questions. And Miranda, feel free to jump in if I missed anything you want to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison.
All right. So we have a few questions. Asked, does Accenture accept part-time employees?
So as of now, I know we do participate in internships and apprenticeships with some of our community partners, such as Goodwill, Project Quest, and of course, apprenticeships for veterans in particular. We are, of course, looking into trying to start internships to offer to, some of our partner schools, such as UTSA and Texas State and, TAMUSA, of course, here in San Antonio. But as of now, not directly to college students.
I would add, not necessarily for college students, but I have seen throughout my career that if someone's in a position where they might need to go part-time, like for example, like they have a sick parent at home or something like that, Accenture is very flexible once you are working in order to try to accommodate people, usually for a temporary period of time, but to make stuff like that work, which is really nice.
All right, thank you for your responses. We have a couple more questions. Dane asked, what's an ERP system?
So ERP is an enterprise resource planning system. So they are typically a very large financials management system. They usually do more than just financials, but for example, they might be your general ledger, your accounting system, but then they might also be tied to your procurement, or they might be tied to your sales system. So really what they're doing is they're just housing all of the transactions across all the facets of your organization and then capturing those. And then as each transaction generates some type of accounting ledger entry, I guess, if you will, or journal entry one way or another, like a debit or a credit. It's sort of doing all of that work. But they really can do so much. They can be your HR systems, they can be accounting, they can be supply chain. And again, those are typically SAP is probably the most common one, Oracle. And then Oracle bought, there was a smaller company called PeopleSoft that Oracle bought many years ago. So you'll hear one of those. JD Edwards is another one that's much smaller, but also common. I think Whataburger uses them.
Awesome, thank you. And then another question is, if you're in your experience, which provider has had more prevalence in enterprise, Azure, AWS, or another?
Oh, it's a tough question. I think I would say like AWS was really like first on the market. So they probably have the most going on. A lot of you might, if you're in like kind of up to date on current events, there's like a lot going on about Azure and government contracts, and like whether or not our current president dislikes Bezos and like if they're not awarding a contract to Amazon because of that. But I would say from a government perspective, we definitely are seeing more work go to Azure, which is surprising because AWS again was around earlier, but there were a lot of trade-offs that I think Microsoft kind of came up from behind and was able to capitalize on. Like they understood where some of the weaknesses were with Amazon. A lot of that was around storage size and how large things could grow. And I think Azure made a play to understand what some of the really large organizations were lacking and add those in. I think Google, unfortunately, is still trying to play catch up. Google's a great place where if you're working with like AI and a lot of the newer technologies, I feel like those are definitely available and maybe a little bit easier to work with. You can turn on the different services within Google and kind of play around with them. So maybe they're, let's say, like better for that, but I think they each kind of have their sweet spot. But for government right now, I'd say it's probably leaning towards Azure.
Alrighty, and then we also have a question that says, do you need a security clearance to work for AFS? If so, does AFS sponsor it?
Yeah, so for most of our entry-level roles, we kind of have that understanding that, of course, if you just graduated from college, chances are you probably don't have a clearance. So a lot of our roles, especially for our boot camp roles, which is again entry level, we don't require a clearance when you start, but typically when you go through the recruiting process, you do go through what we call a pre-screen. And essentially it's just checking your eligibility to obtain a clearance should you need one, because we don't want you to be restricted by the types of projects you can work on. Say you really want to get into this project that is going to be implementing AI, so something really cool, but you can't get on that project because you cannot obtain any kind of clearance, and that project does require it. So a lot of our roles, you don't need one when you start, but of course we do have those conversations if a role does require it from the get-go, and we do assist with obtaining that clearance.
All right, awesome, thank you. And the last question that we have is, what can a summer intern expect to gain from working with Accenture?
So, Marina, I'll let you answer. I'll say, I've worked with interns throughout my career. Usually, I think it's exposure to just kind of some of the major topics. I mean, typically you're on board for not a really long time. Like in the Salesforce world, I'd say my projects typically run anywhere from like, I don't know, I'd say like 4 months to 12 months. And so when you're coming in for a summer, it's usually a pretty short period of time. So you're not going to see a full project end to end, but you're going to get exposure to kind of all of the daily things that are going on. So we talked about, like daily stand-ups and kind of how work is handed off between folks. So you'll have the ability to sort of get familiar with some of the stuff going on. And I think really just get familiar with the jargon. Like, there's so much jargon, right? You're already hearing it, in your college career, and it doesn't get any better. It just gets worse. So I think as an intern, you're going to get exposed to some of that different jargon that we use, both within sort of the IT and technology side, but then also with our government clients. Like you can imagine, I worked for Department of Defense before. That was like every other word in my emails was like a 3-letter acronym that stood for something, that I had to learn, and it took a long time to pick up on. And even now working for the USDA, I have to learn a lot about, I mentioned Animal Welfare Act. Like I work with a lot of folks that are veterinarians. That's not my skill set. Didn't go to school to be a veterinarian, but I have to kind of learn how to pick up on some of those words because I'm creating applications that are based on, what a vet might be doing on site or something like that. So I think as an intern, you're kind of picking up on just what that general stuff is. And then Miranda, feel free to add. I'm sure you probably have some perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, our internships, it is kind of like a test run. Is this is this a company that you feel like you're a good match with, that you can work full time in? I mean, I think, it's a very important time to get that kind of experience. Is working in a federal contracting company something you want to do, and working on some of those projects where, the projects we work on, again, kind of impacts every single person in this country in some shape or form. So is that something you want to do? And, and if it's not, then usually at the end of internships, we have those conversations, have those exit interviews. And so I think it does provide that valuable first experience. And again, just a kind of a test run to see if that's the kind of environment you want to be in. I mean, we hope that is, it's the kind of environment you want to be in. I think we're a pretty fun company. But yeah.
This is kind of unrelated, but I also heard you guys talk about Youth Code Jam earlier, and those are really good ways to network within sort of like the San Antonio community. And like I heard you all were talking about like internships and applying for them and stuff like that. Like, please know, I can tell you as somebody that's part of, like, I'm on the board for a couple of different organizations. A lot of the individuals that support things like Youth Code Jam, they're also involved with other STEM initiatives across the city, and they all sort of like know each other. So, if you're looking for kind of ways to network a little bit more, doing things like that, like volunteering with that, are good ways to meet other individuals that work in STEM, and might be a good, rung on the ladder to kind of get your foot in the door somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, sometimes a lot with these cases of finding internships and even finding jobs after college, sometimes it really can be a who you know game. I know we do have a referral program here at Accenture. So if you know an employee, they can refer you, and they actually get a bonus. So it's just definitely a who you know type of game. And don't feel afraid to ask for help. Of, hey, is your company having any internships? Are they still looking for interns? Can you be my point of reference? Because more likely than not, people in those types of situations, they want to help you in any way that they can. So definitely don't be afraid to ask for help and ask for, again, those references.
All right. Thank you so much, Allison and Miranda. Those are all the questions that we have from Slido.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Allison, I learned something today.
Alrighty, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick. It's just gonna be popping up of what our meeting will be about next ACM-W meeting. Just to have ask you, Miranda and Allison, personally, I have a question towards internships. I interned with Accenture last fall or a year ago about that, and I didn't hear that Accenture had a cloud computing internship. I don't know if that changed or not. Do you guys know of if Accenture has internships regarding cloud computing?
I think, and I mean, Allison, you can correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of the time, it does kind of depend on the type of work that we can do. I know, especially with federal contracting, it can be very tricky with the kind of labor costs and who can work on what. So probably when you did intern, we probably just didn't have that opportunity, particularly for interns to work on. If we had the work at all, because again, it kind of really largely depends on the projects that we kind of have at the time.
I agree.
Yeah.
We also don't call it, like, I know that the title of this is cloud computing, but if you saw on our other slide, we kind of group cloud kind of can go two different ways. If it's software as a service or Java, it usually falls into our digital or our custom group. And if it's more infrastructure as a service, it falls under the infrastructure group. So if you're ever looking, maybe like don't focus too much on the word cloud computing, but look for like digital or like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Java often is cloud-based as well. So stuff like that. But I agree, it's often about the kind of work that we're doing. Sometimes like the roles that require security clearance, obviously we can't quickly stick you in there if you're just an intern coming in. So it kind of limits some of that.
Yeah.
Tiffany, which office did you intern at?
Fairgrounds.
Oh, okay. So were you in conversations with A3?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, just for my own point of reference.
Okay, yeah. Well, Lizette, just quick question. Are there no more questions just in the last minute that we've been talking?
Yes, we actually just got one question in from Dane. He asked, do you guys have LinkedIn accounts?
I do.
Of course.
I should pop up pretty quickly, and Allison might as well, just because I think we do have so many connections with UTSA. So I hear, from all the second, third connections, it should pop up pretty fast.
Yep, feel free. All about expanding the network.
Okay, cool. All right. At this time, it is 6:17, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this meeting. I just wanted to thank Miranda and Allison so much for coming to our meeting and chatting with us and allowing our members to get a little insight into Accenture and cloud computing and all of that stuff. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting here and hope to see everyone else in our next ACM-W meeting.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having us.